Hello, Porto. That was a very hard one to follow up, Miguel, and thanks for introducing. I'm here to, firstly, talk about some aspects of China and relate that. I've been asked to do that and relate that to Portugal. Don't laugh at my shoes. It makes me. This is the way I'm naturally meant to walk. So hopefully, I'll be natural when I'm communicating to you. With regards to China and how it's progressing, actually, it's a very hard thing to explain, and no one really knows what's going to happen in the next 10, 15 years. What is true is that we're both great nations. Portugal has expanded its empire immeasurably with the likes of Cabral and Magellan. Oh yeah, he went to Spain, but let's not talk about that. And so they compare with Confucius and Lao Tzu, the philosophers of China, which are very relevant. And I think there's a lot of work that can happen between the two countries. And as China grows, it's very hard to know exactly what's going to happen because 2,000 years ago, China had the same share of global GDP. It wasn't GDP then, but global wealth as it is going to have now, as it's gone full circle. And what's Portugal going to offer? And it's very exciting times. So I'd like to start to give my perspective on something, maybe not international politics, but it's more to do with journeys and how we think on journeys and how we possibly give you a bit of an insight on how maybe on your next travels, how you can frame problems and how to problem solve. So before I start, I think I'll tell you about some aspects of my journey. It might be a bit boring, but I feel it's quite relevant to how I got here. So I was quite defiant at birth and defied the one-child policy as a twin. I'm the one on the right holding the balloon. Don't think I'm the evil twin. I mean, I'm looking mean, aren't I? And my bro there's looking pretty sad. It's something like 10, 15 years later, we moved to the UK and somehow wrangled into Oxford, both of us, and I'm still the one on the right, looking mean. Then I was very academic, and I've been transformed by the journeys that I've been lucky to be on. And some of those journeys have been, into competition. We're very competitive, us two, and I used to think that I'd make it to the Olympics. And sometimes you're hit by some, devastating events that you really want to change and act on. And I decided to go back to Sichuan, where I was born, to really understand what's happening and give some help. I had to give up some things here, but I felt it was important, and that was my gut instinct. And my bro is doing all the investment banking things, so I know we've got the same genes, so I'm taking the risk. It's okay. We've got a double bet there. So I've been on several other journeys, and the Sichuan one really made me feel what is relevant to myself and understand more about NGOs and the place of work that is beyond profit. And recently I went to Antarctica, and that really hit me because that picture was taken when just the carving just disappeared into the sea, and that really hit me because that is what we are doing to the world, and none of us really are feeling that, and to feel that is really important. And I've been trying to meet as many people as I can, speak to as many people as I can about politics, about climate science, and today I'm not in a position to say that because I haven't got that much experience, but what I'm going to talk about is journeys, because that's profound on me, and I can give some insight onto that and hopefully explain some of the thinking. So this is a great friend of mine, Peter Senge, who's recently published a book called Necessary Revolution, and it's talking about systems thinking. I want you guys to think about any of the problems that you've faced in your life and how you've tried to tackle them. And to be frank, a lot of us, including me all the time, I find myself doing this, is to be looking at the symptoms and just wiping them away and just, trying to find quick fixes. It's an iceberg, and we're not even seeing the root causes of these problems. They could be to do with, you've got a bad back, and so you might need these shoes, because actually you might not think that your walking style is causing your back, and you think, you're trying to sort out this with massages and it doesn't work, or you're overweight and you're trying to take some pills because you're vitamin deficient, and actually you just need to go and exercise, and it's not always the easiest path, and you need to have a good diet, and that's not always the easiest path, but that is the root problem. So that's a very easy explanation of what systems thinking is. And so let's put it in context here, because we need to have this context. That means our existence here is like a blink of this whole conference is like that. So we need to have the humility to know that. And the other thing we need to do is to have an unreasonable outlook. George Bernard Shaw said, all progress depends on the unreasonable person. And that is true. If we're all competing against each other, there's no progress. Anyone that benefits, there's a loser. And we need to be unreasonable and change things. And the last one, and one I'm going to focus on, is searching for those important questions that really drive you to look at problems in a systematic way and to engage others, because that's how you move on those and reach those tipping points. This is an example of something called a fish bank, and it's a simulation of how humans behave when they're asked to compete against each other over a 10-year simulation. Each party is a fishing company, and they ran this so many times, and what is not apparent, and humans just are by default going for the quick fixes, and by default not realizing that sometimes their intuition isn't quite right. Because if you look at this diagram, the top of the peak where the annual fish catch is largest, that's when you think, oh, God, let's get some more boats, let's just beat all our rivals. But actually, if you look at the angle of the fish stocks, that's when the fish population is at greatest threat. That's when you should be stopping. And so the team with the great wisdom, there was only one team that did this in Peter Senge's book, The Necessary Revolution. They actually, all they did say was, let's just show that annual catch figure, and if it starts going down, let's just cool it a bit. And the worst team, the losing team in that game, did better than any of the top teams in any of the other games, because they just carried on fishing until there was no fish left. And so this links back to a good quote that I really like. We need to be thinking on a higher level to solve those problems, and not just by looking at doing the same things. If we're running out of oil, let's just extend the pipelines a bit more. We should be thinking about some of those maybe like alternatives. Alternatives. This is Amory Lovins, another TED speaker. Inspiration to me. He's looking at efficiency. Motorola are looking at the life cycle of products and really challenging this and saying that if you don't need this phone, you can put it as a sunflower seed. And the wind turbines is another kind of message about renewable energy, which I'm very interested in, but I'm going to more focus on the thinking side. And going back to China, there's a huge array of problems: air pollution, water pollution, waste, that is going to limit the Chinese growth. And China knows this. And I'm not going to talk about bad things. I'm going to talk about one good example. And that is an example where the World Bank worked with the government over a 10-year period and over an area the size of France called the Loess Plateau. The Loess means the type of soil there. It's very dry. And this is where the Chinese civilization grew. Southeast of that part is where I come from, Sichuan. It's a fully functional forest ecosystem. Northeast of it is largely grassland. And so you could guess in between that it must have been an ecosystem. But actually, the sacrifice that, how the Chinese grew is that cost to this ground, because it's ended up like that and almost fully degraded. And the World Bank went in there and looked at the systems thinking parts. And this is John Liu, a speaker that was on one of my TEDx's in China. And he looked at designating functional land and ecosystem land, because farmers just said, we can't eat trees. That's very intuitive. We can't eat trees. That's crazy. So therefore, let's just farm all the land we can. And what you get left is that, or we can use animal farming, and what you get left is that. And actually, we need to just cool it and step back and say, look, this is we can eat trees, actually, because if we leave the ground, it'll be 10 times more productive, and then in the end, the trees are actually beneficial for us, which isn't intuitive. And again, the government is helpful there because they just don't listen to the people. Sometimes it's a good thing, and so, things get put in place, massive maneuver or a mobilization of the area of the size of Belgium, 30,000 square kilometers. It's huge. This is what China is good at, and this is what I want to kind of illustrate where China can come into the fore. And would you believe it, in 10 years' time, profound impacts. The same land, 10 years, you would not imagine it could be like that. Once again, same example. So if you go back, yeah. And I was so impressed by this, we decided to go to China and lead an expedition, having 4 TEDx's, and really looking at why this happened and asking the right, those questions. And this is what I want to get into most of you. Asking the right questions is half of the step there. And so we probed the villages, we went and looked at the problems, we held conferences in Beijing, engaged local people, held conferences in Xi'an. We we went on the trains, and you might think that conferences were the best forms of communication. Actually, on the trains, we had the best conversations take place. And I went back to Sichuan again, where I volunteered, exactly where we volunteered, and we then looked at the microfinancing going on and breaking those issues down, trying to get to the systems aspects of that. And that was in Sichuan. On the way, visiting companies. This was the air-conditioned company who wants to have 0 emissions. Amazing, incredible. One of the largest in the world as well. And finishing off in Hong Kong, engaging speakers from top firms. But actually, the ones who impressed me most were the ones who were ordinary citizens, ordinary heroes. I learned more from this man in a 20-minute cab ride caught in traffic than I can say from any of my tutors at Oxford. I mean, they'll probably be shouting at me for saying this. But actually, understanding what people on the ground level think is key to having this systems approach. Because if you don't understand, if you're thinking higher level all the time, you don't know what other people are thinking. And why is this relevant? We have, just as Miguel showed all this information, now we've got a massive explosion of social media. And that has massive implications to what the talent pool can do. We don't lack talent, I find. We've got so much talent, but people aren't focused on where the talent, they don't have a mission. They don't have a commitment. What you need is a moment of obligation when you just say, wow, look, there's something I had, and I said, I don't need to do banking anymore. The money isn't. And we were setting up a system of entrepreneurship networks, trying to facilitate young people to actually go and have this mission. And when I got back, I watched a film called Most of Bicycle Diaries. And this was a quote that Che Guevara said, it is a story, but wandering around America has changed me more than I thought. I am not me anymore. And I think that's what I was. And speaking to Manuel yesterday, I know he's planning a motorbicycle trip around the world, going one up on this. And he's asking those questions. I asked him, how did you organize this conference? And he said, I just asked people. And he's going, and without any money for food, and he's asking people. This is what you can achieve if you ask questions. Not just asking questions about theory, but asking people, seeing what they can do to help you. And I don't mean just like go and daydream. When you're sitting on the bus, well, what is the meaning of life? I want you to think deeper. I want you to think, what can I do? How can I mobilize myself? How can I engage? How can I, really jot the stuff down in a deliberate way and not just, because it's a waste of time. Daydreaming has its benefits, but really, you need to think at the system level. And you can read those books to get yourself up there. But essentially, it's just looking at the system's underlying core issues and trying to go to those. And this is a very important thing to finish. Confucius once said, a man of humanity wishing to establish himself also establishes others. Wishing to expand himself also expands others. And the ability to take as an analogy what is close at hand can be called the method of humanity. Now, just think about that for a second, because Peter Senge's and all these other management people have come up with this theory. And here's Confucius, thousands of years ago, talking about the same thing. And before he says this systems thinking, this analogies thing, he says engaging people. That's what he's saying. You need to bring people with you in order to actually move something, reach that tipping point, which Gladwell says, you need 20% of people to go with you. But you need to engage them before. He had that wisdom back then. And so that's what he's talking about. And equally, as I mentioned, Lao Tzu was again, very fundamental. He said the journey of the thousands, I guess you guys have heard this before, starts with a single step. But I think there's a hidden message there. To be at that point where you're going to take that step is in itself an achievement. Because think about it. If you weren't there, if you hadn't asked yourself to be there, if you haven't changed your thinking on a journey, can you actually start this other journey? So, a lot of people say implementation is key. Ideas, But actually, I want to just turn this around and say that ideas are key as well. And systems ideas that actually solve problems that, in the same way that the Lotus Plateau project was. Just think back. They planted trees. By doing that, they engaged the community. By doing that, they sequestered carbon. By doing that, they improved biodiversity. By doing that, they increased water retention. By doing that, the water retention flourished the whole region, increasing GDP, relieving poverty. How can planting trees be associated with poverty? That is systems thinking. That is looking at the connections. And these two guys said it right there, and that's what we need to be doing. So to end, I urge everyone here in this room, as I've been lucky to go on so many journeys, just go, search. Search for those key questions that need to be asked with an open mind and all of your soul, and with the method of humanity, and engage those around you, and do it together. And if we are able to do this together, anything is possible. Thank you.